Radio 1 FM 90.
Brought to you by Housing Finance Bank, a financial institution regulated by Bank of Uganda. Housing Finance Bank, we make it easy.
Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, a very good evening to you, and thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Spectrum. We are coming to you live on Radio 1 FM 90, which is broadcasting from the Central Building here in the heart of our city, Kampala, along the Stool Street. This radio station is also live on its website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. On that website, there's an icon with the word Listen Live. You click on that icon, and you'll be able to listen to us loud and clear. The other option of listening to us is via DSTV. Our audio channel there is 897, and on StarTimes, our audio channel is 97. Radio 1 is also live on the different radio listening apps, TuneIn, AfroMobile, Your TV channel, Radio Garden, and Stream Afrique. This evening, we'll be looking at the ongoing national population and housing census. We'll be looking at the views of research experts about this process. Now, as you know, we are 6 days into the national population and housing census. That is considered as a very important process as far as planning for the country is concerned. Now, the exercise being conducted electronically commenced on a public holiday, put in place to ensure that many people get counted. The assumption was that you would stay at home and the enumerators would find you there so that they would have maximum time with you to go through the different questions to get you counted. Now, on the D-Day, the Uganda Bureau of Statistics encountered several challenges, ranging from malfunctioning of equipment, complaints from enumerators about lack of facilitation, among other things. UBOS says that most of these challenges have now been attended to. Now, researchers say that the exercise should be taken seriously to ensure that appropriate data is collected. They also say that lessons should be taken not only for future census exercises, but also other exercises involving collection of data from citizens. We know that next month, NERA will be conducting an exercise about the national ID. But also in the near future, the Electoral Commission will be registering you for the 2026 national general elections. Now, tonight, two researchers to share their insight on this exercise, but also provide guidance and advice on how such an exercise can be improved in the future. We value your views and would like to urge you to share with us via our WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090. Tell us what has been your experience when you encountered the enumerators in your area. The WhatsApp number 0703 090 090. My name is Kenneth Lukwagandason, your host. My two guests, Mr. Francis Chibirige, Managing Director at Hatchill Consult Limited. He's also senior researcher with the Afrobarometer Survey Uganda office. They do opinion polls and also surveys about different aspects in our country. Good evening and thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Chibirige.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us on the line will be Dr. Patrick Wakida, Executive Director, Research World International. They are also researchers and publishers of opinion polls. He'll be joining us shortly. The technical team is getting him on board. But let's begin with you, Mr. Kibirige. 6 days into the national population and housing census, what has been your experience, not only as a Ugandan, but also as a researcher?
I'm happy you started with a very important note that a census exercise, a national population and housing census, is very important. And this year's Uganda census theme is reflecting the need to do evidence-based planning for the country. So the exercise is very, very important, and my comment will reflect that importance. There has been mixed kind of experiences right from the first day, where it is being reported in the media and covered by media houses like this one, that the exercise didn't start on a very good footing. We read, we watched, as many census enumerators complained of late delivery of materials, not necessarily faulty equipment, but maybe challenges logging in and setting off with their work. There were also unfortunate reports of some deaths and attacks on people who were conducting the census. Some lost, unfortunately, their lives. Our condolences go to their families. Others lost the equipment they are working with, and so on and so forth. And the wholesome reading, on my opinion, is perhaps we needed as a country to have been better prepared for the census, in the sense that each one of us would have known their duty on that day, other than simply staying home. That we would wake up in the week leading up to that important day ready to play our part, to help here and there, and that those who planned the event needed to have put in place all these. I read with a lot of comfort in the news again from the board chair, the chairman, board of directors at UBOS, who indicated among several things that they are aware of the challenges so far, and that they take full responsibility for those challenges, and they are doing everything possible to rectify them. And again, I'm glad to hear you report that UBOS says most of these challenges have been addressed and that the census is on track. We hope for the best, and we know that census, that the Bureau of Statistics will produce a valid and competent census report at the end, and the data that we can all use. So in a nutshell, that's my take from the census.
All right. When you say we were not prepared, someone will be baffled. This exercise is well documented, supposed to happen every after 10 years. Yeah. We also know we were supposed to do it sometime back, but it was postponed due to lack of funding. Then we were told funds have been put in place. So one would say the managers of the exercise had ample time to prepare, and Ugandans, from what I have heard, hundreds millions stayed at home waiting for the enumerators on the D-Day, which was a public holiday. But if you sample, very few people actually got to be counted on that very day. And some people are actually asking a question, why did they actually put in place a public holiday? Because some people think that was the D-Day, the day majority would actually get counted.
A very good question you raise, but let us also be reflective of the challenges of the time. The census can be conducted on one day if you throw enough resources at counting people. That's one. Two, I don't want to sit here and believe that the Uganda Bureau of Statistics got access to everything they needed well in time. We don't know. They may have received...
Actually, they kept on updating the country, and they said all system go.
Yes.
All system go. We even had a team here on Spectrum who told us everything is in place.
Yes. So everything can be in place, hopefully, or planning-wise. But when did everything hit their stores is another question. Thirdly, we also understand that a census is complex. We've organized events, we've organized parties, we've organized home meetings, and we've always said we will start at hour X, and maybe we started at hour Z, or we planned to attend and we didn't. So this exercise draws so many people together to work together in tandem. When I say we were not ready, I am reflective of what we saw on day one. Okay. But I'm not privy on what we had in our stores as UBOS, in UBOS's stores as a store for our country to conduct the census, what they had on that morning. But nonetheless, it is important to note that when we, for instance, declared a national public holiday to conduct the census on that Friday, everyone sat home expecting to be counted. And for me, when I say we were not ready, I'm like, okay, for instance, if the copies were not ready, did we have an alternative? what we should also think about is that sometimes these national exercises have a window in which they can be conducted. I have a big opportunity. I have a big privilege of working with census officers from now 42 African countries. In our work with the Afrobarometer, we also assisting national partners across all these countries to prepare for their national population sample surveys. And this has given us an opportunity to understand how these processes work, especially in the African context. But when we say we were not ready, we were like, we didn't have an alternative. And sometimes we have to understand that there is a window that this census is planned to take place. And if it doesn't take place in that window, then it will have to be postponed further. For instance, there are not many countries on this continent that will conduct a national census soon before or after a general election. And we know that, for instance, you cannot easily push an election date further. So if elections are due in 2026, then you will not be going to conduct a census in that same year, for instance, 2026, 2025, or 2027. So this census, and also knowing that technically the intercensal period is about 10 years. So, and last one was 2014. Prior to that was 2012. Prior to that was 1991. So you can notice that we were already getting out of tandem with prior census periods. So it kind of feels like this was the window that the Bureau of Statistics had to conduct the census, and they had to get ready to do it within that time.
All right. We are joined by our other panelists on the line, Dr. Patrick Wakida, Executive Director, Research World International, researchers and publishers of opinion polls. Good evening, Mr. Wakida. You are live on Radio 1. Can you hear us? Dr. Wakida? Dr. Wakida, can you hear us? Well, the technical team will be getting to Dr. Wakida to actually provide us his perspective. But you said you had a privilege to work with some census offices in other countries. Looking at how they do their things and how we have done it here, what kind of lessons do we need to learn from the way they conduct their things?
The biggest lesson is to be ready in time. It is important to put all resources on the table and to ensure that all materials, all processes, all activities are put on the planning table and scheduled appropriately, number one. Number two, we need to look at ways to improve on processes that count everyone in a country. Other countries are looking at, everything nowadays is moving digital. There are many other processes in the country that collect data from people that we can rely on.
For instance?
For instance, we all register to acquire national IDs. We all shop somewhere. Many of us have a bank account. We have a telephone number. So those data need to speak to each other, those databases. And that when a country decides to take a population census, it doesn't start from zero. There is somewhere we can start and update. So looking to the future, we could say we don't have to always start from zero to say someone will walk to your house and count. If I am available, can I, for instance, log in online and provide my data? Can I call or be called and answer online rather than sitting in my sitting room reading a newspaper waiting for a census officer to knock at my door? So there are ways we can, but all of these alternatives build on one huge concept of trust. That the respondent, I trust the enumerator that has come to my house. I see competence in them to record my details. I also have trust in who is receiving my information. and I have the understanding of how this information will benefit me. That the day, for instance, a small group in my community, maybe a community organization, needs data about how many we are in our community, we can easily walk to a census office and request for this information at no cost and no bureaucratic delays. And we will get the information and make use of it. Thirdly, I think what I have seen in other countries, that the census office is not in one location. For instance, in countries like Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, the census office is decentralized. So they will have offices, for instance, here in Uganda for parts of the north, the east, the western part of the country. So some logistics and some surveying can be directly undertaken by them. So what we had, for instance, here, that the procurement, the recruitment for census enumerators was conducted by the districts, and the districts had to forward the names of enumerators to UBOS, and then UBOS posts their emoluments back to the districts, and that created a delay. And then when you sit here and on the news and watch on TV enumerators saying they have not received their allowances, then you understand that there is a delay system-wise between their parent districts forwarding their names to the bureau and the bureau posting their monies back to the district, and then the districts dispensing the monies to them, yet the census has started. But if, for instance, the Bureau of Statistics had a regional office in Masaka, you could say, okay, can they do that directly? Can they do that quicker? That's some of the things we can look at. Well, but certainly planning earlier and putting everything on the table ahead of time.
Right. There's some people have argued and say that government has enough infrastructure to actually collect data from time to time. We have hospitals where people are born and die. We have government offices almost everywhere where you have districts. We have RDCs. All that you need to do, given the importance of census, is to get a population-focused person who can sit there and from time to time update on the data collected from districts, so that we don't have to wait for 10 years to have this kind of exercise. Would that help? Do you think there's, beyond what you recommended, do you think there's an intergovernmental system that can actually help us to deal with this issue of population census, let's say maybe every after 1 year or something like that, with updated information about the number of people who have born, the number of people who have died, and things like that?
Those kind of systems could help to provide preliminary data, but not census data. Census counting is very technical. There are many things we don't mention that need to be in place, that need to be reported on. And statisticians working on the census will need to use in order to make a better estimate of us. Some countries don't actually conduct this kind of a census at all. They collect a small portion of data from a small portion of the population and use that to make projections, and are able to tell how many people are in the country. But this information that you start with needs to be pretty accurate. We are not yet there. For me, what I would recommend, and my understanding is that even though we have this great reach of government in every corner of this country, most of these officials we are talking about are not census demographers. They are not technical in this area, and they are not set up to do this kind of work. But in a role that can support the actual census people, census teams, yes, that can happen. That's why for me I feel that if our Bureau of Statistics had regional offices where they have regional presence, maybe that can help going forward. But to say that an LC1 or chairman LC3 or chairman LC5 or the team at the district can also be drawn into, and they are in this case, and we see where we have gone. So for me, I think we need people that are set up to conduct this kind of exercise, and they are constantly looking out at the data that we currently have from all these sources, triangulating it, and then see the gaps and learning from that. So when the census is due, they are able to do it right and on time.
All right, Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90. Please do share with us your views using our WhatsApp line, which is 0703-090-090. My guest this evening, Mr. Francis Kibirige, Managing Director at Hatchill Consult Limited, also a senior researcher with the Afrobarometer Survey Uganda office. We expect to be joined on the line by Dr. Patrick Wakida, Executive Director, Research World International, researchers and publishers of Opinion Poll. Our discussion today centers on the National Population and Housing Census, and we are looking at the view of the research experts on this process. Please do share with us your views using the WhatsApp line 0703-090-090. Tell us your experience. We're going to go for a break. When we return, we will broaden further the discussion, looking at the lessons that we learn as we prepare for other exercises that involve collection of data from people in this country. Stay tuned. Radio 1 FM 90 will continue after this break.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. Our topic of discussion today, we are looking at the National Population and Housing Census. What is the view of the researchers on this process? My guest this evening, Mr. Francis Kibirige, Managing Director at Hatchill Consult Limited, is a senior researcher with the Afrobarometer Survey Uganda office. They do surveys and opinion polls. Also on the line, Dr. Patrick Wakida, Executive Director, Research World International, researchers and publishers of opinion polls. We are looking at the National Population and Housing Census, which has entered the sixth day today. So meaning we have 4 more days left to actually have this exercise concluded. According to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, the final results of this exercise are expected in 1 year, in December. In December, that's when we actually expect to actually hear from them giving us the final results. Dr. Wakida, thank you very much for joining us on the line. Dr. Wakida, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but faintly.
All right. Give us your view on the exercise so far. From your side as a researcher, the key lessons that you think we need to take as a country as we prepare for similar exercises going forward.
First of all, I didn't hear your question very well.
Well, and the question is, we have probably similar exercises that involve collection of data from Ugandans. Your fellow panelist here in studio, Mr. Francis Kibirige, has explained a number of issues. We wanted to hear from you as a researcher. What kind of lessons can we take going forward for similar exercises?
You see, the problem with Ugandans is that they are quick to condemn an exercise. A census is a very, very, very tedious activity. It requires a lot of money. It requires enough time. Unfortunately, people reading through the different fora, they seem to suggest that this exercise should have done on a single day. The reason why they put up to 9 days was because they were aware of the challenges of a census. I wanted to help the listeners to understand the meaning of a census. When you talk about population census, you mean that snapshot of a nation's people. The aim of it is to provide the different measurements, the different information. You'll be able to know the population size. You'll be able to know where they live. You'll be able to know the different characteristics. Those who are very poor, those who are in middle class, those who are educated, those who are not educated, the different characteristics. So it's a very important exercise for every country. In fact, the most important thing to know is that census must be conducted every 10 years because data become absolute. Now, it has its own advantages, but it also has its own disadvantages. especially in a population which is not cooperative. You are likely to get biased data. People will give you falsified information, and that information might be a problem. It is costly. Government or people must forego certain things to make sure people are counted. Because as a country, you cannot count. I mean, you cannot plan for a country without knowing the data. You can't create new constituencies if you don't know its population. For example, you cannot build a hospital if you don't know the population. You cannot know how many people are disadvantaged or who are disabled persons if you have not done a census. So it's a very important exercise, and in the future, government should actually plan, budget for it, and give it enough resources.
All right, Dr. Wakida, of course you did raise a number of issues, and including provision of adequate resources. Does that suggest that there was no appropriate planning? What are some of the glitches that you see that could have been avoidable, given the manner in which the exercise has been conducted so far?
We've run almost a deficit budget as a country. One thing I can tell you that the country has been broke for the last 2 years. Forget about the lavish life you see. You will realize that this budget of 300 billion was only passed in a supplementary, I think sometime in September or so. Now, many people forget that in order for you to do a census, you need millions, and you need to count about 46 to 47 million people. You have various enumeration areas. You need therefore to pay the people who are interviewing, the people who are going to process the data, the people who are going to write the report. The cost is enormous. If I am in Kampala and I have enumerators in Kampala, I have to travel them to Barara, I have to travel them across the country. That is a very expensive exercise. So in the future, what government needs to do is really to prioritize the census, because data after 10 years becomes absolute. And any census what we're talking about should not be older than 10 years. We knew this. Unfortunately, in the past budget, it was thrown out, but thank God it was brought in the supplementary.
Right. Let's bring in Mr. Chibiriga in our studio. You've heard also from your colleague there. He seems to say probably there was some lack of proper planning, even on the side of funding. But we had gone through this thing. Maybe let me put also this to him. Dr. Wakida, one would wonder whether there is a cost-effective manner in which a census would be conducted. You as a researcher, how would you advise on the issue of the cost? Because like you said, we need a lot of money, but some people will argue that actually we do not need a lot of money to actually count people. There are better ways to do things. Do you think there are other better ways that we can look at going forward?
Let me tell you the definition. The definition of a census is that it's a complete count of people and their property. That's the simplest definition. If you want to do a complete count, what method do you have? We've used the simple. This year, actually, I want to applaud you. You have used the cheapest method, the juror method, that we want to know where you slept. So we shall count you in those places where you slept last night. There is no other simple method, simpler than this, to count the people to get actual data, especially in the countries like these of ours. Now, in future, probably you can, but again, you need to be at the household. You need to go to your home and count the people that lived there last night. You have the floating population, those who are driving, the truck drivers, You have those who are in the boarding school. We can count those at an institutional level. But I looked at the questionnaire of Lubos. I looked at their methodology, and I can tell you they use the most cost-effective method to derive at a national census. And anybody who disputes that methodology should only be telling us which method should we have used. From being a faith-based researcher we know that even if I was only doing a stamp of 30,000 enumeration, I can tell you, I will post that at 150 per enumeration, you can get the total price you will have to pay me. Now, what about if I am enumerating 46 to 47 million people? So let us run away from the cost. Let us look at the quality of data that we can get for purposes of policy, for purposes of planning, for purposes of knowing where our people live. And the biggest challenge in this country is to look at the simplest way, the shortcut to getting things done. The challenge with that methodology is that then you do short work. I know many people are saying we haven't been counted, but remember we have up to the 19th to count people. So you who haven't been counted, you'll be counted. I am sure the interviewers, the enumerators are going around the country, and I'm very sure that they will do that.
All right, let's get back here in studio. We have a comment coming in from one of the listeners, Henry, who actually writes in and says we have Yubos, Nita, Nira, and who are all headed by intellectuals. That's what he says. He uses some words here, which I don't think I should say on air, but he says, with my NIN number, I can register all members of my household on an e-questionnaire. This method would capture data for 30 million people in Kampala, Wakiso, Mukono, and Jinja. The strategy used wasn't well thought out. Everyone who has NIN number is a recognized person. What's your take on this, Mr. Chibirige? Somebody here actually says, if he's a head of a household and he has a NIN number, the wife also has a NIN number, electronically they can be able to register all the people in their household, and then you don't have to wait for an enumerator to actually come to your house. All you need is a server where this information is actually being collected.
Thank you very much for reading to us that question. Like I said before, there is information that can be auxiliary to a census exercise. And there is information that the census will take as primary data. My take is that when you are in charge of collecting census data, you want to have data you have faith in, data you can vouch for, and the data you can have your stamp on. And that's data you've collected primarily. Data that can be collected in this format, we know, remember I said that some of these could be very helpful, but they have challenges of their own. We have, for instance, we don't have a complete coverage of internet connectivity across the entire country.
He actually said it could do Wakiso, Mukono, and Kampala, meaning there's internet provision in that area.
We forget that not everyone who is living in this urban metropolis would be very tuned in and ready to internet, take survey to like log in and self-register. And some of the questions that are being asked in the census are not questions that you will self-enumerate in. So whereas it sounds great on paper, it may not be very well easily implemented. For me, what I think we could do is we need to be ready month before the actual census day or census period, so that we can be able to receive the enumerators. For now, the Afrobarometer has piloted in now 6 African countries conducting telephone surveys on the phone And the reason we are doing that many is we are comparing them to see if there are any differences with the data we collect when our interviewers walk into a household and interview people face to face. And we still see very many big differences. And when we publish this data from telephone surveys, we actually don't include it in the same mainstream publications like we do on face-to-face survey interview data. So whereas to some people, those avenues of doing surveys, answering questionnaires on the phone, on the computer, would be okay, to others it is a strange interface that they would not be able to do. So I agree that these can help, but not maybe now. We need another transition to be able to use them effectively.
All right, we have more comments coming in, and we'll hear from Dr. Wakida on also that issue which was raised by Henry there. Somebody says the whole exercise was poorly planned, was very poorly planned. The office was not ready even till now, when the exercise takes 10 years. How come they were not prepared for this? What is the use of that ministry then? And says Uganda uses that emoji that suggests I give up. Tell them I have not been counted yet. That's a comment coming in from Evelyn Angom there. We have another comment coming in from Alex Otim, who writes and says, to date we still have not been counted. I don't know if we will. Only God may blow the enumerators to our household. 10th May was a missed opportunity when everyone waited at home to be counted, and they blew the golden opportunity. Shame, shame, shame. The census is a planned project taking place every 10 years. So doing a sloppy job as is happening is not excusable. We seem to do good things by chance in this country. That's a comment from Alex Otim there. We have another one, rejoinder, coming in from, no, this is a comment that comes in from David, who actually says, I suspect that things could not go well during the first days of census because of struggles over who gets how much in census operations, not because there was poor funding. Anyone who has worked with UBOS in their researches knows how they operate. Then he puts exclamation marks there. Then we have another rejoinder from Henry, who actually says, Mr. Panelist, those enumerators are just like me and most people who are not statisticians like you. Do you trust the data that they are sending to you? Well, those are some of the comments coming. Let's go to Dr. Wakida for some response. Then we'll come back in studio to Mr. Francis Chibirige. Dr. Wakida.
Now, let me first of all say about the cost. Then I will also talk about the different methodology that should have been used. You've heard the word called universality. In data attribution, you want a universal methodology. I heard you read somebody saying that they should have Mukono, Kampala, and I think Wakiso should have done an online completion of a questionnaire. That's wrong. It assumes that everybody has got a smartphone, that everybody has got data, that everybody has got the ability to do so, which is wrong. If you are going to do a universal census, the method done in town is the same methodology used in the rural area. If you are going to use, for example, online completion of questionnaire, how many people, including my own mother, she doesn't have a smartphone, she doesn't have data, how would you ensure that everybody completes a questionnaire? So that methodology is effective. That's number one. Now, the future. In fact, in the future, this is what I have proposed to you boss. You want to cut cost, subcontract. Divide this country into 15 sub-regions. There are a number of research agencies like Afrobarometer. They are there. I've had my colleague in the studio. if you gave Afrobarometer enumeration areas of Western Uganda, the cost they would pay would be less than the cost you are paying. Of course, that's true. If you gave Research World International the whole of Eastern Uganda, and you only retain one function which is called supervision, training, and making sure that the people who are trained understand the questionnaire, you would cut costs by about 80%. That is how the district surveyors do. They don't go to the field, they subcontract surveyors to do. That's how government valuers do. They don't go to the field, they subcontract and they only report. That's the only method that you can use. Now, unfortunately, they don't. They don't do that. They go to the field by themselves, and that could turn out to be very expensive. Now, somebody raised a question, said, how do you trust these people who are picking data? They are not statisticians. It is true, they are not. But remember that they are trained. Training happens on a questionnaire. In fact, you are an enumerator for a period of your work, which could be 9 days, but you are trained for about 5 days. You are paid for all of those periods when you are being trained. And if you don't understand the questionnaire, you will not be, deployed. So you don't need to be a statistician, because statistics does not start by picking data. You are not a statistician by picking data. Statistics start at the time when you've collected data and you are making sense out of that data. You are analyzing it. You are looking at how many people you have enumerated are of what age, how many of those have an education of what level, how many of those are women, how many of those are Christians, how many of those are Catholics, how many of those are, the different tribes. That way you become a statistician. You are able to do a cross-tabulation to generate the data. In the methodology that you has used, in the one we call the jury, you want to see that Mgwere, like myself, who is in Kampala, is not attributed to be the center. I am added on my population in Bucket. That's called cross-tabulation. And when you start to do that, you have already turned into a statistician. So you don't need to be a statistician to be deployed. Social scientists, people studied education, anybody can be trained to pick data, because you are trained in management of the questionnaire to ask questions. Who does not know how to ask questions? Doctors can ask questions. Teachers can ask questions. Everybody can ask questions. So at that time of enumeration, it is about asking questions. And you are given a certain region to manage. If you live in Kira, you are given a ward and say, this is your ward, this is how you work. You don't need to have gone to university to study statistics to pick data.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wakida. Thank you very much, Dr. Wakida, with those quick responses. We have more comments coming in. Mr. Wakida, you ably explained the importance of national population and housing census. It is not only about the number of Ugandans, but possibly the population structure in terms of the kind of life they live, that's a level of education, their quality of life, how they live at the household level. This helps to develop policies and planning for the population. My only challenge is when it comes to livestock. UBOS, year in, year out, has concentrated on only numbers of livestock and possibly breeds, but they do little about the herd structure, which takes into account issues of calves, heifers, young bulls, mature bulls, etc. He actually thinks that there is need for improvement in that particular area. Then we have a comment coming in from Gelvis to the agenda, who says, talking about internet reach is a lame excuse. Satellite can reach everywhere. Using parish chiefs would get trusted than UBOS, and they can be trained too. That's a comment from the agenda. Then we have another comment. In Uganda, a national project like Census, elections, etc. is an opportunity for poorly paid local government staff to earn extra income. Therefore, usually Electoral Commission and UBOS in previous censuses has been paying them handsomely. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case because they received very little money from the government. Therefore, this time census allowances were too little to motivate local government officials and even enumerators. That was the only problem why the exercise wasn't conducted well. I hope NERA picks lessons from this. That's a comment coming from Joe, who is listening in from Kamocha. Well, gentlemen, let's wrap up the discussion and I'll come to you. We have one last comment. Somebody says, I agree we should conduct the census every 10 years. Census is not just about the number of people, but other things such as coverage of services. What we need to do is test tools for 4 months before the exercise. Some questions asked are as if for a 4-month-year-old boy. Well, that's some questions ask if a 4-month-old boy has learned. That's a comment from George, who is listening in from Uganda. We are coming towards the end of this discussion, and maybe let me go to Dr. Wakida first for his closing remarks as we return to studio. Dr. Wakida, your final parting shot as we come to the end of this show.
I think we should appreciate the work of UBOST. Conducting a national census is not a walk in a park. I hear people say we should have pretested the questionnaire. It was done. Remember, we are using the technology, the tabs. Tabs can fail anytime. So if in your place of enumeration, the tab fails, it doesn't mean that the exercise was not planned. 2, when somebody says that, it's time for people to make money, let's wait for an exercise to see how many people enumerated, how many Ugandans there are. If you haven't been counted, we have a margin of error. Margin of error incorporates those who were not counted, those who were wrongly counted. You have a margin of error of +5, sometimes -5. So, 2, we are going to do what they call post-census evaluation. So wait for the post-census report to tell you what kind of census it was. Ugandans should get out of this business of criticizing everything and start to support things that people are doing. Census is not an activity for everybody. It requires a lot of careful thinking and careful doing. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for your concluding remarks, Dr. Wakida. Let me come to you, Mr. Francis Kibirige, your closing remarks as we come to the end of this show.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. I think this is a very big opportunity for all of us to learn that exercises of this nature are not the responsibility of the institutions that conduct them primarily, but the responsibility of all of us, and that we all need to play our part to help institutions such as UBOS, the Electoral Commission, or NERA to prepare and conduct these exercises more successfully. So I think for me, I would call upon everyone who hasn't been yet counted to remain vigilant.
Including myself here.
Yes.
I've not yet been counted.
Myself as well.
Oh.
So to remain vigilant and on the lookout, stay home or leave contacts behind to be called, to be notified, so that we take part into this exercise. And then very lastly, to say that we need more information from UBOS, more assurances, more updates, so that come the final census report, we will all be satisfied with the result.
All right, we come to the end of Spectrum today. Let me thank you, Dr. Patrick Wakida, for staying on the line to share your views with us. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Francis Kibirige, for also coming into studio to broaden this discussion. And thank you very much, dear listener, for your comments. You indeed helped us to shape the discussion here in studio. Well, I've been your host, Kenneth Lukwagandason. Up next, we're going to have the news in English with Ms. Josephine Dagano. Thereafter, we'll have the Soul Train with BB Jr.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.